David has been my best friend since school, and we've stayed in regular touch despite our hectic lives as engineers. We're both fascinated by the paranormal and have experienced an eerie encounter together, which I recounted in my story, The Ghostly Hitchhikers. Even though we seldom meet due to our busy schedules, we keep in touch through phone calls and emails. A couple of years ago, we found ourselves with a long weekend thanks to a few public holidays in the United States. My wife suggested a beachside getaway, and I immediately called David. He and his wife, Jane, were on board, and we quickly planned a trip to Murid, a popular beach destination about 180 miles from our city. Murid's pristine beach and the historic Janjira Fort, which had never been conquered, made it an attractive choice for us history buffs. Notably, Murid is just 7 miles from Kashid, where we had encountered the ghostly hitchhikers, but we decided to proceed with our plan despite that memory lingering in the back of our minds. We set off at 7 a.m. in David's SUV and arrived at the resort by 10 a.m. The resort, perched on a hill overlooking Murid Beach with a dense forest at the back, was stunning. We spent the morning at the beach and, after a quick lunch, visited Janjira Fort. We returned to the resort by 8 p.m., had a lavish dinner, and then retired to our rooms. David suggested we play cards before bed, so we headed to his room. Upon entering David's room, I felt an unsettling chill. I mentioned it to David, but he dismissed it as the sea breeze. We played cards for 2 hours and had a great time. Around midnight, we decided to call it a night. Little did we know our ordeal was just beginning. My wife and I fell asleep quickly, but at around 1:30 a.m., I was awakened by a knock on the door. David stood outside, looking worried. He explained that Jane had suddenly started feeling very cold and was shivering uncontrollably. My wife, a doctor, accompanied me to their room with her medicine box. Jane was wrapped in 2 woolen rugs but was still shivering, her teeth chattering. My wife found Jane's body feverish and icy cold. She gave Jane some tablets to help her sleep, and we decided to stay with David to support him. Around 3 a.m., as my wife dozed off and I was about to, something creepy happened. Jane suddenly sat up in bed with an unfamiliar look in her eyes. David tried to comfort her, but she pushed him away with such force that he was flung 6 feet across the room. Jane, in a voice that wasn't hers, said, "Let me go. I have to go." She stood up, seemingly in a trance, and headed towards the balcony. David and I used all our strength to pin Jane down while my wife fetched help. With the assistance of the hotel staff, we moved Jane to our room. All the while, she kept repeating, "Let me go. I have to go." Once in our room, she calmed down and fell asleep. We were relieved but shaken. It was around 5 a.m., and we speculated that the spirit's hold on Jane weakened with the coming daylight or due to moving her out of that room. The next morning, Jane was fine and had no memory of the night's events. She was surprised to find herself in our room, but David reassured her, promising to explain later. As we were checking out, a hotel staff member confided in me about a gruesome incident that had occurred in David's room months before. A woman had flung herself from the balcony after a fight with her companion, who was never traced. The staff had occasionally felt a creepy presence in the room. We advised the resort manager to perform a cleansing ritual to free the tormented soul, though we never returned to find out if they did. David later explained the events to Jane, who was initially shaken but eventually came to terms with it. The thought of what could have happened if David and I hadn't been able to subdue Jane that night still gives me chills. In 2008, my ex-girlfriend and I decided to escape to Porto Galera for a 3-day, 2-night vacation. We found a budget-friendly beach resort online, which was a steal during the peak summer season. The room was huge, capable of housing at least 8 people, with a dining area, a cozy living room with a plasma TV, and a well-equipped bathroom. The resort had its own pool and bar, though the beach was a spooky 5 to 7 minute walk through a forest of ominous trees. When we arrived, An eerie silence greeted us. The resort was nearly empty, with only a couple and a family on the first floor, while we had the entire second floor to ourselves. The first day went smoothly as we basked in the sun, tried various beach activities, and had lunch at a nearby cafe. We returned to the resort around 8 p.m. for dinner, followed by a few drinks before heading to our room at 10 p.m. That's when the nightmare began. As we settled in, the bathroom door suddenly creaked open. There was no draft or breeze, just an unsettling silence. We brushed it off, but around 2 a.m., I woke to my girlfriend's blood-curdling scream. She was being dragged halfway off the bed. I pulled her up, and she told me about a horrifying dream where 3 hooded figures tried to drag her into darkness. As she woke, she felt hands pulling her from under the sheets. My heart pounded as I tried to calm her down. Then we both saw it. A dark, shadowy figure crashed into the window, resembling a large bird desperately trying to get inside. It thrashed against the glass for what felt like an eternity before vanishing. Terror-stricken, we grabbed a pocket Bible and began praying. As we recited the Lord's Prayer, the bathroom door slammed shut on its own. The air was thick with dread, but as we finished the prayer, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. At the first light of dawn, we fled the room and spent the entire day at the beach, shaken to our cores. Has anyone else experienced something this terrifying? I'm still haunted by the thought of whether it was a ghost or some other malevolent entity. About 5 years ago, during summer vacation, I visited my ancestral town of Lakewood, nestled in the scenic Pacific Northwest. Lakewood is renowned for its pristine beach and lush forests. My great-uncle lived there with his family, including his son's wife, and their 2 children, Josh and Tim. Josh was older, while Tim was my age. While staying in Lakewood, my family and I spent our days playing and chatting around the house and courtyard. Each evening, Tim, 2 neighboring friends, and I would take walks on the secluded beach just a 5-minute walk from our home, passing through dense forest along the way. The beach was so isolated that we rarely saw anyone else there. One day, Tim had errands to run in town, and our friends were away. Deciding to visit the beach alone, I set out with the intention of returning before dark, as my parents and uncle had advised. I enjoyed the cool breeze and serene atmosphere, something we rarely experienced in bustling city life. By the time I decided to head home, it was already dark. As I left the beach and entered the narrow forest path leading to our house, I suddenly heard a distressing sound behind me. It was a man's anguished cries, filled with pain and desperation. The language sounded like Urdu, though I couldn't be certain. My heart raced, and I broke into a sweat as I nervously turned around. To my horror, I saw a man with a long beard and cap, injured and bleeding from his face and hands. He was crying and pleading with his hands clasped together. Despite the darkness, I could clearly see his suffering. Terrified, I ran home as quickly as I could. Upon reaching home, I collapsed in a corner, trembling uncontrollably. My family rushed to my side, but I was too frightened to speak. My mother took my temperature, which was alarmingly high at 102 degrees. She gave me medication and urged me to rest, but I couldn't sleep that night. The next morning, I finally recounted the entire experience to my family. They seemed puzzled and suggested I might have dreamed it. However, I was convinced it was real. Later, an elderly town resident known as Old Man Johnson visited my uncle. When my uncle shared my story with him, Old Man Johnson revealed that it was likely the ghost of a trader. According to town lore, about a century ago, a group of traders had come to Lakewood. They were notorious for their inappropriate behavior towards local women, leading the town men to chase them away. While most escaped into the forest, one was caught, severely beaten, and left to die near the beach. Old Man Johnson's account matched my encounter perfectly, confirming my fears. It was a chilling confirmation that I had indeed experienced a ghostly encounter. To this day, just thinking about it sends shivers down my spine.